Hello, boys and girls and babes. Welcome back to the Janaea Talks Caps podcast. As always, thank you all so much for tuning in today. It is a pleasure to have you here. And please, we ask that if you do find yourself enjoying today's show, then please go ahead and click on that subscribe button, as we do not want you to miss any future episodes. We are right in the thick of the season here right now. The Capitals, they are in a playoff push, and we have got the trade deadline coming up this week on March 8th. So we have got lots to talk about, and we are going to continue to have lots to talk about moving forward as well, no doubt. So click on that subscribe button, join us for this ride. We would love to have you along with us. Okay. Now that we have got that little piece of business out of the way, there is likely to be some business coming up ahead here this week for our Washington Capitals. As I mentioned, we have got the trade deadline coming up on March 8th. And so today, what I wanted to talk about for today's show was, what should the Capitals actually be doing at the trade deadline this year? Should they sell? Should they not sell? If they do sell, then to what degree should they sell? Because I think that we can all agree, right, that like at this point in time, the Capitals are not going to be buyers at the deadline, and nor should they be buyers at the deadline. And General Manager Brian McClellan is not going to be doing that at this time, which is a good thing. Smart by him for sure. So this is more so a conversation right now between selling or standing pat, or between selling more versus selling less. And I can see the argument for both sides, definitely, and they both have merit. Okay, they both have legitimacy. Because on the one side, the side for a total sell-off, it is definitely never a bad thing to be stacking draft picks and prospects, right? The Caps are in the process right now for sure of getting younger, and they did very well selling at last season's trade deadline, where they were able to stockpile a lot of draft picks by selling off their expiring unrestricted free agents who they were not going to re-sign anyway. And then they were even able to utilize that surplus of draft picks immediately, as they flipped one of those picks for a very good young defenseman in Rasmus Sandin, who they just re-signed, by the way, to a 5-year contract extension at a very team-friendly, I would say, cap hit. His cap hit, coming in well below what was projected. It was projected on a 5-year deal to be around $6 million. He signed for $4.6 million per season. So again, 5-year contract extension for Rasmus Sandin. But yeah, that's a guy that they took one of those picks, one of those draft picks that they had acquired at last season's trade deadline. It was one of the draft picks that they received from the Dmitry Orlov Garnet Hathaway trade to the Boston Bruins. So they took one of those draft picks from the Boston Bruins. They immediately flipped it to the Toronto Maple Leafs and acquired Rasmus Sandin. So I think that when you're talking about selling, that is probably exactly the type of strategy that Brian McClellan and the Washington Capitals organization would like to employ again here this season, is to ship out, the older, more expensive, unrestricted free agent pieces who you weren't going to re-sign anyway. And in return, you get back some draft picks, some prospects, some younger NHL players, younger NHL talent. And in terms of prospect needs, the Capitals' prospect cupboard is actually already suddenly getting to be pretty stacked, if I'm going to be honest with you, as they have had very, very, very good drafts these past couple of years, nabbing high-end talents like Ryan Leonard and Andrew Crystal at last year's draft, Ivan Miroshnichenko and Alexander Suzdalev the year before that, and those names just being added to a prospect pool that already contained the likes of several up-and-coming players. So we will get into the prospecting more in depth on another episode, as you can have a whole conversation all about that all on its own, as the Caps really do, like I said, have several exciting young names to talk about. So we will get into that more in depth another time. as this episode is going to be primarily focused on trade deadline strategy and the impacts there. But like, just to give you some of the names that are in the Caps prospect pool already right now, obviously, like I said, the big names, Ryan Leonard, Andrew Crystal, Ivan Miroshnichenko, Alexander Suzdalev, and obviously, we're seeing some of their first round picks from past years, such as Connor McMichael getting regular NHL time this season. Hendrix Lapierre, another one who has played some NHL games this season and has looked phenomenal, by the way, whenever he has been called up from Hershey. Third round pick, Alexei Protas, has graduated to the NHL, and in fact, he has been so good, so impactful at the NHL level that the Caps have already inked him to a 5-year contract extension as well. And ditto for Beck Malenstein, who was a 5th round pick of the Washington Capitals. He is a full-time NHL player now, and a very good one at that. He was a 5th round pick. First rounder Alex Alexeyev as well. He has played some NHL games this season. First rounder Lucas Johansson. He also got some NHL action earlier in the season, as did Hardy Hamann-Octel. They've got guys like Ethan Frank, Pierre Dubé, Matthew Phillips that they have added to the mix here. Those are 3 of the top goal scorers in the entire American Hockey League. And in case you missed it, by the way, the Caps also the other day, they signed the Western Hockey League's leading scorer, Zach Funk, to an entry-level contract, 3-year entry-level contract. That is a big signing for the Washington Capitals organization, as there were reportedly upwards of 20 NHL clubs lining up to try to acquire Funk's services. He is a very talented young player, just 20 years old still. He has a ridiculous 59 goals and 103 points in just 59 games in the Western Hockey League this season. A goal per game player, 2 points per game player. Those are absolutely wild numbers. So 59 goals, 103 points in just 59 games for Zach Funk. Absolutely wild, like I said. And he is also a plus 45 this season as well. So obviously he's doing fine defensively as well. And they have also got guys like the Washington Capitals do. They have also got guys like Riley Sutter, Bogdan Triniev, Ryan Hoffer up front, Vinny Iorio, Ryan Chesley, Cam Allen on the back end, and of course Clay Stevenson and Hunter Shepard in goal. Clay Stevenson is by far the American Hockey League's best goalie this season, and it is not even close. The 24-year-old is smashing records with the Hershey Bears, despite the fact that he is a rookie. So that is obviously very impressive, and the Caps appear to have their future number 1 netminder already in the organization with Stevenson, who they just signed to a 3-year contract extension as well. So that's huge, locking him up as he's having this type of rookie season with Hershey. And then obviously having Hunter Shepard in the organization is very good depth as well. He was the AHL's playoff MVP last season as Hershey won the Calder Cup. So you get the point, right? Like, the Caps organization is pretty fucking stacked already, prospects-wise. But I do think that there are a couple of positional needs that they would like to draft at. I do think, for example, that they would like to still add a future number 1 center and a number 1 right shot defenseman. I think Connor McMichael and Hendrix Lapierre, they both still project to be more second line center material rather than a true 1C. And although Dylan Strome is obviously still young, just 26 years old still for Strome, and he has obviously filled and is filling that role admirably right now in the absences of Nicholas Backstrom and Evgeny Kuznetsov, you still would ideally, I think, like a 1C prospect who's going to grow up in that age group with all of those guys, right? Like the Ryan Leonards, the Ivan Miroshnichenkos, the Andrew Crystals of the world. And same with the top pairing right shot defense prospect. Obviously the Caps are extremely set on the left side with Martin Feravari, Rasmus Sandin, Alex Alexeyev, all still under the age of 24. And they do have some nice right shot prospects on the back end in Vinny Iorio, who we've mentioned, who is a top pairing man on the AHL's best team in Hershey. Ryan Chesley, who just helped Team USA win gold at the World Juniors, playing heavy minutes on their top pairing. And Cam Allen from last year's draft, perhaps somewhat underrated at this point, but he's a very talented player. Like, he's projected to be a very good offensive defenseman. He fell in last year's draft quite a bit because of the injuries that he had. So he had missed a ton of time, but he's a very talented player. So again, he's projected to be a very good offensive defenseman. But still, like, I think internally, right, the Caps probably feel that they would still like to draft a true number one defenseman on that right-hand side to eventually take the reins from John Carlson, right? Although John Carlson's performance this season suggests that he is still having a lot left in that tank, right? Like, he is leading the entire National Hockey League in ice time right now, and he is still in the 98th percentile, also known as the top 2% of players in the whole league, in wins above replacement. So he's playing a lot. He's doing really well with it. He's always played a lot, but he's still, it's a big deal when a player is still playing a lot like that when they move into their 30s, right? And when they're still doing really, really well with those minutes, as John Carlson is. So yeah, he's in the 98th percentile, the top 2% of players in the entire National Hockey League in wins above replacement. So he is still a very impactful player for the Washington Capitals. And so, all of this is to say that I don't think that John Carlson is like riding off into the sunset anytime soon at age 34, as he's still a very, very, very effective hockey player. But those are two future needs, right? Or maybe future wants of the Washington Capitals organization. As like I said, they do already have guys who could possibly fill those roles. But those are two positions that I could potentially see the Caps wanting to make a draft pick at. But that's why this could go both ways for this season's trade deadline, right? Because while I'm sure that they would love to draft those two positions, it's also not a crazy immediate need of the franchise right now. Can you get by for right now with Dylan Strome, Connor McMichael, Hendrix Lapierre, and either Nick Dowd or Riley Sutter, depending, of course, on what the Caps decide to do with Nick Dowd at the trade deadline. But, can you get by with that for now? You absolutely can. I think that Dylan Strome's play ever since he's come here, and the way that Connor McMichael has looked in his first full NHL season as well, and the way that Hendrix Lapierre has looked every single time that he's been called up from Hershey, these guys are just getting... These guys are just getting better and better and better and better and better with every single game that they play. And these are good young players, right? It's not as if we're talking about some talentless NHL journeymen here. These are good young players, former first round draft picks. I say former, it was a few years ago. They're still in their early 20s. But yeah, first round draft picks, good young players who are only going to continue getting even better with more time spent in the National Hockey League, with more development, right? And so, although certainly, of course, it does hurt when you're trading away a fan favorite, such as a Nick Dowd or a Garnet Hathaway last season, it does make a lot of sense to do it anyway when you have the young players who can step in. I know it hurts. It sucks. They're fan favorites. We don't want to see them go. But it makes a ton of sense to do it when you have, like I said, those young players who can step in and fill that role at a cheaper cost as well. So obviously young players, entry-level contracts, they're going to cost a lot less. That opens your window, right, to compete, to build back up this team, to being a real true contender once again. And I mean, look no further than the Garnet Hathaway trade last season, right? Because good God, from a sentimental standpoint, right? God, that was painful at the time for us fans, wasn't it? We love Garnet Hathaway, but the reason that the Caps felt comfortable trading away the older Hathaway for futures was because they knew they had an, at the time, 24-year-old Beck Malenstein playing and rocking it with the Hershey Bears en route to a Calder Cup championship. And they were very, very right, by the way, as it has worked out beautifully for the Washington Capitals, as they got the Boston Bruins draft picks, and now Beck Malenstein is doing everything that Garnet Hathaway did for us. We still have the best fourth line in the entire National Hockey League. We haven't seen any drop off there whatsoever. Beck Malenstein is bigger, faster, and obviously much younger and cheaper than Garnet Hathaway was. And another byproduct of that Hathaway trade to the Bruins as well was that it also, like I mentioned it earlier in the episode, but it also landed us Rasmus Sandin as well. As like I mentioned, we used one of those Bruins draft picks, turning right around and flipping it to the Maple Leafs for Sandin. So I think we definitely could do a similar thing with Nick Dowd this season here, at this season's trade deadline. If the Capitals choose to do so, it will be up to them. Dowd does still have 1 year remaining left on his contract with the Caps. So it's a little bit different than the Garnet Hathaway situation, as Hathaway was about to be an unrestricted free agent when the Caps traded him to the Boston Bruins. Nick Dowd does still have an additional year left on his contract with the Caps. So it'll be up to the Caps if they want to do that or not, but I think that we could see them doing a similar thing ultimately with Nick Dowd, as they did with Garnet Hathaway, because just like they had Beck Malenstein waiting to replace Garnet Hathaway, they also have Riley Sutter waiting to replace Nick Dowd. Riley Sutter, if you don't know, he's 24 years old. He is a big kid. He skates extremely well. And just like Nick Dowd, he is extremely responsible defensively. Sutter was Hershey's top defensive center last season when they won the Calder Cup. And he was regularly deployed against the opposition's top lines and tasked with shutting them down, which he did very successfully. Sound familiar at all, Caps fans? Just like Beck Malenstein is a younger Garnet Hathaway, Riley Sutter is a younger Nick Dowd. And funny enough, talking about how Riley Sutter has been frequently deployed by Hershey against the opposition's top lines, it was Beck Malenstein, when he was also in Hershey last season, who was frequently deployed in that role with Riley Sutter. They were line mates, in fact, when Hershey won the Calder Cup last season. So, just saying, I could see it happening, Nick Dowd at the trade deadline this season. It could go either way, though. It's going to be up to the Washington Capitals. They're not under any pressure to trade Nick Dowd. He doesn't want to be traded. He wants to stay here. They're not under any pressure to trade him because of the fact that he has that additional year still left on his contract. He's not an unrestricted free agent, so it's not like he's going to walk at the end of the season for nothing, right? You're not under any pressure to trade him, but you can if you want to, and he should fetch quite a large return if the Caps do choose to trade him, as he obviously would be a highly sought-after player, the best fourth-line center in the entire National Hockey League. It's been reported as well that a ton of teams have a ton of interest in him and have all season long. They're constantly calling the Caps, are you going to trade this guy? Can we get him? What do you want for him? So it'll be up to the Caps. We'll see what they do. And by the way, all of this, when I'm talking about Beck Malenstein and Riley Sutter, all of this is not to discredit anything that those guys, Garnet Hathaway and Nick Dowd, have done here by any means. Not at all. It's just that it is a fact that if you have good young players waiting for a spot to open up on the NHL roster who can do the job as good or better than the older guys and at a cheaper cap hit, and you can stockpile draft picks while making that change, that's a no-brainer, right? But on the flip side of the coin, okay, just to play devil's advocate a little bit here, both ways, on the flip side of the coin, assuming that you do not want to become the Buffalo Sabres, the Ottawa Senators, the Columbus Blue Jackets, right? These teams that just suck for years on end, year after year after year after year after year, with seemingly no end ever in sight. Assuming that you do not want to end up like that, then sometimes selling all assets every year, stockpiling draft picks and young players every year, that doesn't always work the way that you want it to, right? It doesn't always work the way that you hoped it would. And those teams I just mentioned are a perfect example of that. And the reason why it doesn't always work is because losing is a habit, people, okay? This is something that I don't think that fans necessarily think about all the time. Fans just think about, the return, right? The draft picks that we can get back, whatever we can get back in a trade. But culture within the locker room, within the organization, that's also a part of it. It has to be. Like I said, if you don't want to become the Buffalo Sabres, the Ottawa Senators, the Columbus Blue Jackets. And so when you're so dead set, right, on stockpiling draft picks and shit that you're stripping the team for parts every year at the trade deadline, then you are going to consistently be a bottom 10, bottom 5 hockey club. Which, sure, great draft order that you're sitting in probably. That's not even for sure, though, because you have to remember that the NHL draft order is lottery determined, right? Which means that you do not guarantee yourself a top 5 draft pick, for example, by finishing bottom 5 in the league standings. You don't guarantee it. You can't guarantee it. All that you've done is you have simply given yourself more lottery ball combinations, but you haven't actually guaranteed yourself anything, right? And losing is a habit. So when you get your draft picks every year and you draft all of these young players, right? And then all of these young players are coming into the NHL to play for a team that doesn't know anything but losing, a team that, like I said, is finishing bottom 10, bottom 5 every season, season after season after season after season, and really not playing any meaningful games past maybe January at the latest, right? Like that's half of the season every year where the games are essentially completely meaningless for these young kids coming in, while other kids on other teams who are playing for winning programs are getting that necessary experience of playing in games that mean something, playing in games that matter for more than just your individual stats, right? So we have seen it time and time and time again with some of these other organizations. Even here where I am in Vancouver, like that shit went on for 10 years here with the Canucks, because even once they had, Elias Pettersson, Brock Besser, Quinn Hughes, Bo Horvath at the time, it did not matter at all for the standings. Like it did not matter at all for making the playoffs, because all those young guys knew was losing. All they knew was losing. It wasn't until just this season, when new head coach Rick Tocchet finally got them straightened out, that they actually finally started playing some winning hockey. Canucks fans, they refer to it as the centuries-long rebuild because it literally went on forever, okay? So, but that's what happens, right? Like, it doesn't matter how talented the players that you draft are. Like, if you were setting the expectation within your organization that it is okay to lose, then that is what you'll get. That is all you will get, because kids don't just come into the NHL and know how to win at the NHL level all on their own, right? They don't. Like, they have to learn how to win at the NHL level. They have to be taught how to win at the NHL level. They have to see it. They have to do it themselves. It's just like learning anything, right? Like, if I want to learn how to speak Japanese, for example, I'm not going to spend all of my time studying Mandarin then, right? Like, if you want these young players to learn how to win, don't spend all of your time doing everything in your power as general manager to make sure that they lose. That's all I'm saying. And I realize that it is a little bit different here within the Capitals organization, because they do have this great partnership with the Hershey Bears. It's a great program. It's a winning program. In fact, the Hershey Bears are basically a winning machine at this point. They, of course, they won the Calder Cup last season. They look like they're well on their way to winning another Calder Cup this season with a 41-9 record, I believe it was, the last time I checked. 41-9. 41 wins in 50 games. That is ridiculous. So it is different here in Washington, because those guys, like those young guys, they are playing in a winning program, right? Like, they are developing within a winning program where winning is the expectation all the time. And they're experiencing a lot of winning, both during the regular season and in the playoffs down in Hershey. So I recognize that it is different here within the Washington Capitals organization, because they do, like I said, have that great partnership with the Hershey Bears. But like Connor McMichael said it best, honestly. Connor McMichael, of course, he was a Calder Cup champion with the Hershey Bears last season before joining the Capitals full-time this season. But McMichael said about winning the Calder Cup with Hershey that once you get a taste of that, right? Like, once you get a taste of winning at the professional level, that really just makes you even more thirsty to go win again, right? Like, and then that's all that you want to do is just win more and more and more and more and more. That's all you want. So like, that is a very good experience for those kids to have. And that's exactly the type of winning culture that you want to build, that every organization wants to build. But it's easier said than done, of course. And now that you've built it for those kids, you really just want to keep feeding into that winning culture more and more and more. Like, keep feeding into those young guys' winning attitudes more and more and more. I mean, McMichael said it all right there, quite honestly, right? And management should probably listen to him, because like I said, like, if you don't want to end up like the Sabres, like the Senators, like the Blue Jackets, listen, like right now for the Washington Capitals, as of right now, missing the playoffs has been just a one-off, right? It has been a one-season anomaly at this point, after having been in the playoffs basically every single year. Really, basically every single year since Alex Ovechkin was drafted, right? Like, they had made the playoffs for 8 straight seasons up until last season, which was the second longest streak in all of professional sports. And even before that, right? Like, they missed the playoffs that one season when Adam Oates was randomly the head coach. But other than that, like, they had not missed the playoffs since Ovechkin was like just coming into the NHL, right? So right now, it's a one-off. It's an anomaly, like I said, and you are going to be way better off if you can keep it that way, right? Like, keep it as an anomaly rather than making it the new norm. Like, whether it's a 1-season anomaly, a 2-season anomaly, like, you can miss the playoffs for a few years, that's fine. But you don't want that to become the new norm, right? And you certainly don't want to be getting to a point like those other teams that I mentioned, Sabres, Senators, Blue Jackets, these types of teams. You can throw a bunch of those types of Blackhawks right now, like, horrible situation right now for Connor Bedard in Chicago. Like, you don't want, and Chicago's really trying, by the way, not to let that become the norm. Like, that's why they signed all of those veteran players in the offseason, to try to surround Connor Bedard with some people who know how to win, with winning attitudes, because they don't want that losing culture to become the norm there now that Connor Bedard is there. Like, they don't want that to be okay, right? You don't want that to be the expectation, right? That losing is fine. So all of this was to say that you're going to be better off if you're the Washington Capitals, if you can keep that as kind of an anomaly. Like, you don't want it to become the new norm, right? Because losing is a habit. And just like I said, though, just like losing is a habit, winning is also a habit. And if you remember, like, the Washington Capitals core, they did plenty of that, winning in the regular season before they ever won the Stanley Cup, right? Because winning in the regular season is hard too, right? Like, winning division titles, winning President's trophies is hard. It's not easy. And the Caps core won plenty of both of those, winning 3 President's trophies and so many division titles that I honestly lost count several years ago. Like, they were literally winning the division title every single year for forever. But those things are not easy to do, right? Like, I feel like we as Washington Capitals fans, because we've had so much success in the regular season for so long, like for such a long time, that we do, not all of us, but some of us tend to take it for granted, right? It's not normal the last 2 decades that the Washington Capitals have had here. It's not normal to win your division title almost every single year. It's not normal to win 3 President's trophies in the span of 7 years. Like, that's not normal. Those aren't normal things, right? So I feel like we feel like they're normal because that's what we've experienced here during the Alex Ovechkin, Nicholas Backstrom era. But it's not normal. And I just want people to realize that, because I do feel like some of us sometimes do take it for granted a little bit. But like, those are hard things to do. It's not easy to do. And to win enough games during the regular season to get those types of accolades, right? Like, to win the division title, to win the President's Trophy, like, it takes an extreme amount of discipline, right? Like, an extreme amount of consistency, both on and off the ice, in order to be able to win enough games over the course of 82 to be able to get those types of accolades, right? And those are all habits that are going to help you in playoff runs down the line, those winning habits, right? The discipline, the consistency, all of those things are going to help you in playoff runs down the line if you can build that over the course of these regular seasons with your young players. And that's exactly what we saw with the Caps when they did win the Stanley Cup. Like, to that Caps core, Alex Ovechkin, Nicholas Backstrom, John Carlson, Braden Holtby, Tom Wilson, TJ Oshie, like, winning was not optional, right? It was the expectation every single year. Like, they expected to win. They expected that of themselves. They expected to win a hell of a lot of games every single year. They expected to make the playoffs and give themselves a chance to win the Stanley Cup every single year. They expected to win their division and get the number 1 seed and get home ice advantage in the playoffs every single year. And they did that literally almost every single year throughout their entire Washington Capitals career. So it's an amazing, amazing job that those guys did with establishing that expectation of themselves and holding themselves to that expectation year after year after year after year after year, establishing that winning culture. Like, that is what you want of your core players, right? And, it's what we want to happen again with this new wave of young players coming in. So losing is a habit, winning is a habit. Being in a playoff race at the NHL level for these young guys is invaluable. You cannot get that experience without being in it. And you can't be in it if you sell at every year's trade deadline, right? So I don't know, man. The experience, to me, like, it's just so valuable to these young players, and to their development as NHL players. Like, being in a playoff push, a playoff race, which the Caps are still very much in right now, by the way. Everyone's talking like they're out of it. They're not out of it right now by any means, rather. But like, playing these games that matter every single night, right? Being in a playoff push, a playoff race, playing these games that matter every single night, these hard, fast, tight games where every single play truly matters, every inch truly matters, right? Like, where you are fighting with your life to get the 2 points every single night, where you're under pressure every single night. Like, that experience matters a lot for young players who you plan on having in your organization for a long time, right? So I don't know. Like, to me, selling off all assets last season was the right call, because they were out of the playoff race. And even if they hadn't been out of the playoff race, like, Peter Laviolette was not playing the young players anyway. So there wouldn't even have been anything for those young guys to even gain, really, right? Like, even if we had been in a playoff race, which we were not. But Peter Laviolette was not letting them play anyway, the young guys. So there wouldn't even have been anything for them to really gain anyway, right? But this season, it's a totally different picture. Right? It's totally different. As, like I said, they are not out of it by any means at this point. They have actually clawed their way right back into it, despite all of their myriad of injuries. And it's been in large part thanks to all of those young players that I keep talking about. Like, they are largely the guys who've been driving the bus here during this revived playoff push right now, along with Captain Alex Ovechkin, who has also been amazing at 38 years old. And so I don't know, man. Like, Spencer Carberry, he's building something pretty amazing here. It's clear as day that all of the players, young and old, have fully bought into what he's selling them, right? It's clear as day. And so I just honestly think that, like, selling fully at the deadline right now would not be the right call. Not this season, not right now. So I guess I kind of just answered my own question there. Like, I'm thinking out loud here, but like, I did just kind of answer my own question, like, to sell or not to sell, or not to sell or not to sell, because we know that we are going to sell some, but at least, like, to which degree should you sell, right? I talked myself through it. I worked it out loud. And you know what? Yeah, like, in my heart, I just feel that is not the right play right now, not with the team playing the way that they have been. There's been a couple of blips on the radar. The Detroit game, certainly the Arizona game. But by and large, for a good, like, over a month now, the Caps have been playing some great hockey, and their young guys specifically have been playing some great hockey. So with everybody to a man being committed to what Spencer Carberry is asking them to do, with everybody to a man busting their asses every single night. And like I said, they are winning games now as well. So they're getting that positive feedback, right? Like they're getting that result that they want from putting in the effort. So they're seeing with their own eyes the positive results that they can get if they put in the work, right? And so I just think that, like, for me, as someone who has played hockey since I was 4 years old, to me that just sends the totally wrong message to the team, and specifically to the team's young players. If you were to, go into this trade deadline and just completely, blow it up, sell everything. Maybe if we didn't have a bunch of really young, really talented players who we expect are going to be with this team for a very long time, who are going to be playing for the Washington Capitals for a very long time. But we do, right? We do have those guys. And so it comes back to everything that I was saying earlier. You have to send the right message in moments like this. You have to be cognizant of the lessons that you're teaching and the habits that you're instilling. You have to reward good play and not, pull the rug out from under guys who are giving you 110% every single night. Like, give them a chance to finish the job here and get into the playoffs. They might make it, they might not, but that's not really the point, right? Like, just give them the chance to try to finish the job. Because you know what? Like, they have earned that chance with the way that they've been playing. So give them that chance, like I said, to finish the job. Because like I said, winning is a habit, and losing is a habit. And you want these young guys picking up the right habits, being in these moments, and learning how to win these games. You start developing that competitive culture now. It is only going to benefit the organization a ton later on. So, you can sell some pieces that are on expiring contracts, like guys who you weren't going to re-sign anyway. That's definitely a good move. And you can add some more future assets by doing that. Like, that's always a good thing. Just spitballing here, but I'm thinking guys like, Joel Edmondson, Max Pacioretty. I don't see any reason why those guys need to stick around, quite frankly. They can definitely go. Probably a guy like Anthony Mantha too, even though he is finally having a good season. But you aren't going to re-sign him, right? No way do you want to go down that rabbit hole. We've seen, what he does for the first so many years of a contract when he has a long-term contract. So I don't want to be the team that is stuck with another long-term contract for him, paying that, no thank you. So to me, you don't want to go down that rabbit hole anyway. So, and so this is exactly the time that you should sell him, right? When his value is at its highest. When his value is at the highest it's probably ever going to be, in fact. But if it were me making the decisions right now, some of the guys with term still left on their contracts that have been talked about as potential trade chips, like guys like a Nick Dowd, a Charlie Lindgren, right? Who are, let's be honest, important to this team's success, right? If it were me calling the shots right now, I would probably stay away from trading those guys right now, unless the return you're getting really blows you away. But otherwise, no. I'd probably hang on to them for all of the reasons that I just talked about, right? Being in a playoff race, playing meaningful games down the stretch, give these young players a chance to experience it. They have earned it. And hey, given that guys like Dowd and Lindgren still do have another season left on their deals after this one, you will still be able to sell them for assets at next season's trade deadline if you choose to do so, right? So it's no biggie, honestly, if they don't go anywhere this trade deadline. We don't have to freak out about it. It's not as if they're walking at season's end here for nothing, right? They have another additional season still left on their deals. So anyways, I have babbled on for long enough here. I'm starting to lose my voice. I don't know if you can tell. So I will let you guys go until next time. Thank you all so much for listening. Really, really appreciate it. And please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast as well, if you haven't already done so. We are available, I should mention as well, we are available across all major podcast platforms. Have a wild trade deadline, babes. I'm sure we will have plenty more to talk about after Friday. I am sure that the team will probably look at least a little bit different by then. So we will catch up with you after that. Until next time, babes, it has been a pleasure. And as always, let's go Caps.